Hello, everyone. I'm Sean Dillon, and for the past year, I've been tormenting with my good friend Frezno with a list of comics. Why? Because I've been tormenting them for the past 5 years with a list with the idea that the Straight Story is the best Star Trek movie. Say hello, Frezno.
Hello, it's me, Frezno Inferno. I've been talking about comic books for the past 14 months. It's been really enlightening and horizon broadening, and I read some really good books thanks to this desire to see this meme to fruition. So the journey's been a wild one, much like the journey of an elderly man on his riding lawnmower going from Iowa to Wisconsin.
I suppose that's actually a pretty good place to start. Frezno, what did you think of the Straight Story now that you've finally seen it?
It's a pretty good movie. You can definitely, when you think, oh, it's a G-rated movie by David Lynch, you think, what? How can that be? There's no supernatural weirdness or abject terror or all this other stuff, and no ambiguous, strange nature to it. But when you actually watch it, it does have that David Lynch heart to it in a lot of ways. You do meet a lot of strange characters that wouldn't feel out of place in a Twin Peaks. And
I mean, there is some supernatural stuff going on in the world, but it's not the focus of it. Like, there's this woman who keeps running over deer.
yeah, the deer lady, that she feels very much like a Twin Peaks weirdo, as it were, for want of a better term. But it's all about this journey, and there is a little bit of industrial nature to it. I'm thinking of the scene where they look up at the grain elevator, and the industrial nature of this riding lawnmower. David Lynch has this sort of industrial. I mean, you look at Eraserhead, and you can see,
Yeah.
the grinding industry. But it shows up in other films too, like Elephant Man is going back to the first principles of that to Victoriana.
Heck, you also have Twin Peaks, which is set in a logging community.
Yeah. I mean, even the credits, with that serene music, is just it's footage of logs getting cut up by saw blades. Yeah.
Yeah. I actually recently finished the autobiography David Lynch wrote, Room to Dream, which,
Oh,
my God, what a man. Yeah,
what a guy! Rip in peace.
yeah, even as it was clear that he slept around a bit, you could tell that he was still nevertheless a charming guy, not unlike certain comics people that I'm not going to name.
No, I don't know who you're talking about. All I know about is the comic books that I talked about for this thing, which you can read about on my blog, Fresno'sRavingRant.blogspot.com, if you're so inclined.
All right. Well, let's actually talk about those comics for a bit. We start out with Thunder and Lightning by Kimberly Wang, which I picked because you like punching magical girls, so I figured start with a punching magical girl.
Yeah.
Looking back, what do you think about that book?
Yeah. That you definitely eased me in with something in my wheelhouse. And going into these early on, I tried analyzing like the colors, because Thunder and Lightning is what they call a two-tone comic, where the only major primary color, aside from black and white, is red. And I really honed in on what that had to mean, and what I ended up coming up with was both love and the passion of battle, because this book is, for lack of a better term, heart-pounding. Like, you've got these scenes of these magical girls trying to fight, and the onomatopoeia is just a beating heart. Boom, 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 boom. Oh my God. Like, the adrenaline is going, and they're fighting for their lives. And it's a very passionate book. And that really struck me.
Yeah, I actually got this book on a whim while I was at a convention a few years back. That guy went to the booth. Silver Sprocket is a very up-and-coming comics company that's unfortunately, like a lot of the comics industry, gonna be hit hard by certain administration decisions.
So, oh God. Look, I'm Canadian, and even I am being hit by certain administrative decisions, so I feel you. I feel you down there.
Yeah, well, apparently the ambition is Canada, 51 states of America.
God almighty. Well, let's hope it doesn't come to that. I don't want to have to jump ship and move to St. Pierre.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably not going to come to it. It's very clearly incompetence all the way down.
And yet,
And yet.
But of Thunder and Lightning.
Speaking of which, Pulp.
Oh, Pulp, yeah, the second book. Pulp by Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips is the last gasp of the Western, an old cowboy in the 1940s dealing with Nazis, and in exactly the way that Nazis should be dealt with guns.
Yeah, Pulp is one of a series of graphic novels that Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips have been working on over the past couple of years. They've been pivoting away from single issues and towards graphic novels. So you'd have works like Pulp, House of the Unholy, which is a bit messy in terms of the middle, but it's about the Satanic Panic. But it's very much a book that doesn't fully gel, in part because it doesn't really pay off the themes of the relationship between the Satanic Panic and the modern conspiracy theories. Then you also have stuff like Where the Body Was Found, which is attempting to be sort of a Twin Peaks. This is a story that's about the town that the dead body was found in, but doesn't fully work because it just doesn't have the right style for it, and it's a bit languid in pace.
Interesting idea.
Ed Brubaker loves to do pulp and loves to do crime fiction. His most famous work is a series called Criminal.
Right. Yeah. This one I liked because it did have that pulp elements and, the last gunslinger vibes where, oh no, old West stories aren't selling anymore. It's 1940 and that old stuff is out of hat. You're old. You're out of date.
Yeah, and moving on to younger and cheaper writers.
Yeah. I am looking at my blog entry, and I did show the panel where the old cowboy blasts a Nazi in the fucking face. Modern art.
Yep. After that, we had The Hard Switch by Owen D. Pomeroy, which, if I'm being honest, I didn't really fully gel with. I thought that it was a bit too cold and static, and not as good as Pomeroy's other work, like Victory Point, which is about a young person returning to their hometown.
This one, I liked it. It has a certain vibe to it that reminds me of other works that are near and dear to my heart. Dirty Pair, Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, and esoteric weird things like this old OVA called Dragon's Heaven. It's just about scavenging and going through space in this weird world and doing what you can. And it has a neat little anti-capitalist bend as well, where the hard switch is, oh no, we need to hoard as much stuff as we can, or else, the old systems of wealth will die out, and we can't have that now, can we?
No, we can't. And after that, I gave you recent work by Ron V. and Felipe Andrade, The Many Deaths of Lila Starr.
Oh, I really gelled with this one. This was fun.
Yep. Very much a modern reboot of modern interpretation of Death Takes a Holiday through the lens of Indian culture, both their mythology and their world. My good friend Ritesh Babu, who talks heavily about the cultural impact of the one where she smokes to death.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not of that. I'm a white person, so I don't really have much on that. But the use of smoke in the book is very interesting to me because it's portrayed as this incredibly glamorous and sexy thing. You've got this death in this book has the appearance of like a beautiful Indian supermodel, and she's smoking, and it just looks beautiful and glamorous. But also, it's death, not just her, but that smoke is filled with carcinogens that are going to kill you. And I'm not even talking about the part where, she dies in the fire because she fell asleep while smoking. Just death is lurking in the book, even if it's beautiful.
Yeah. After that, we had the first of many complicated works, Nick Sionis' Unflattening.
Okay, this is the one. This is the one that unlocked everything for me. Like, this is when I really got it. Like, up until now, I was just like, okay, here's the art, here's the pretty colors, and here's how they write. But this is an honest to God Harvard dissertation on the nature of comics and how they communicate ideas. And the core thesis is that, with words, you have the sequentialism of words, and you type out the sentence, and it all comes together as you read it. And with an image, you're taking it in all at once. And comics combines those two into this completely unique art form that's unlike any other that humans have made.
Yeah, I actually found this book out during my college years. I went in, a teacher of mine had it on their shelf, and I went, "Oh, this looks interesting. Can I borrow it?" And they said, "Sure." But I actually hadn't read Flatland until after I read this book.
Oh, wow. Yeah, they do focus on that a lot. But yeah, this was key in understanding how to criticize the rest of the comics on the list for me. Just these specific ideas that are presented there, and how they relate to, here's how you're seeing, here's how the words and images combine to create something new, express how this particular comic artist is using them.
Yeah, after that I went with Are You Listening by Tilly Walden, a rising star in the comics field who work with color is fantastic. But also the 1st of May with a trigger warning regarding sexual assault.
Yeah, it's a heavy little book. Just a story about some queer kids going along the lonely highway in Texas on a weird and wild road trip. And there's lots of trauma. There's lots of nasty stuff coming after them on the way. And in the end, it is a positive book about hope and healing. But it does go into some pretty dark subject matter. Like the actual portrayal of the... It's a flashback, but just the way that it's told just makes it hit you like a ton of bricks.
Yeah.
Because as it goes on, the art gets more scribbled and more frantic as it's a panic. Just holy shit. And this is not even the last time we're going to talk about how such a horrible fucking thing is portrayed in the form of a comic.
Yep. After that, we have the first of our set of comics that are basically earning this activity, getting us to the explanation for the straight story is. At first, I pitched this as, "Hey, Frezno, want to do something fun like the Criterion Challenge?" And then we did this one, which was Kamen Rider, which tied into the podcast that we both appear on, or rather, Frezno appears on, and I recently stopped guesting on until we talk about certain people.
Yeah, we talked about Kamen Rider Build together on the podcast, and it was a really fun one. But Kamen Rider, the Shotaro Ishinomori manga, was very good. I really loved the ink lines on this. I mean, with manga, you're dealing only in black and white, so you're already at a disadvantage of sorts. But they turn that into an advantage by just being so expressive with the way they can use their ink.
Yeah. How do you think it compares to the Kamen Rider series that you've seen?
Well, it's a lot heavier, because it is based on the original 1971 Kamen Rider, which is very much, oh god, body horror and just the shame of being inhuman and the relentless grind against fascism.
Yeah.
Which Build has the last of that, of course, but, it's a lot heavier than the original manga.
Yeah, and I flipped through your article on it, and I noticed that you talked a bit about the Legend of Zelda comic, which I actually did like as well. That was actually my introduction to Ishinomori.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah, that's a classic. Yeah.
Speaking of manga, I decided to take a month off from giving you various stuff involving podcasts and other things for this podcast to talk about the brilliant Pluto by Naoki Urasawa and Takashi Nagasaki.
This was a big one. Oh god, basically like, hey, what if we took this arc from Astro Boy and really amped it up, took it real seriously, but not in a way that's like, oh, look at me, I'm taking something for kids and I'm making it mature. No, there's actual what's the word I'm looking for? actual thought and care put into it rather than just, ooh, I'm edgy.
Yeah, considering the history of, of Astro Boy, you also have to keep in mind that this is Ozuma Tezuka riffing on a work by Mitsuhiro Yokoyama called Tetsujin 28, which is basically an adventure story about a young boy controlling a giant robot, but also has a giant robot Batty who looks suspiciously similar to Pluto.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, it's very much engaging with. Yeah, it's the original one was very much going back and forth between two authors. Yeah. Anyway, sorry, I probably should have done more research on this before saying that.
No problem. No problem.
Yeah. After that, we have Deanna Mohammed's Shubik Lubik, which was recommended to me by my friend Ritesh Babu, and I read it digitally and then went, "Fuck me, I need to own this."
Yeah, this is a really good book. This one.
Do you want to talk about it?
Oh yeah, I mean it's basically all about wishes and whatnot, and telling stories. You'd think it's telling usual monkey paw stories, but these are really interesting ones. Like I really liked the one about what's his name, Noor. I hope I'm saying that right. He's this rich, privileged kid who you'd think, what would he need a wish for? But actually, he's anxious as hell, and the way the comic represents this is it continually shows all these graphs and pie charts to measure his anxiety and probability that you're totally fucked, and here's the chart.
Yeah, this book is non-comics paneling exceptionally well. There's pamphlets, there's charts, there's pieces of prose that are just freaking delightful while reading throughout. You can truly see the impact and implications that the comics medium could employ, but usually doesn't, as demonstrated by the bad one, Adventures of Superman John Kent by Tom Taylor and Clayton Henry.
Oh, fuck me, this fucking book. Oh.
Originally, I had Hush on there, but a friend of mine made a good case for Hush, so I decided to swap it out with a Superman comic where Superboy hugs fascist Superman to cure fascism.
So this is the first traditional, when you think of a comic book, big 2 superhero comic book, and I really didn't like it. The main thrust of this book is interacting this Superman, John Kent, Superman's son, I guess, in throwing him into a parallel world, which is basically just the lore behind Injustice, which is like a decade-old DC fighting game for Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3 era. Why are we here? Why are we engaging with this?
I can explain that, actually.
Please do.
So, at the beginning of his career, Tom Taylor, like many comics writers, was jobbing around for whatever work is available. Maybe some indie work that's just basically try to jumpstart a comics career. In 2013, when that video game came out, they had to have a tie-in comic, which Tom Taylor was the writer on.
I see.
And he basically got his start by doing issues that could be summed up as, hey, can we not do this dark Superman stuff? Can't we get back to hope and love? But this was also in an era where the New 52 was around, and where Superman was seen as this dark, brooding figure in the comics, and also, given that it was 2013, this was right after Man of Steel, where Superman killed Zod by snapping his neck.
I'm laughing internally because the whole, oh my god, Superman's so dark, why can't we have a hopeful story like the old days? That's the pitch behind Infinite Crisis. That doesn't fucking work either.
Yeah, oh god, yeah. I'm not making you read Infinite Crisis. Don't worry,
you know what's funny?
Never make you subject.
John, I already have technically, but not the comic. I've read the novelization.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, because you were trying to find Final Crisis's novelization.
Yeah, no. I saw Infinite Crisis at the bookstore. I was like, oh, isn't that the thing? And I picked it up, and I'm like, it's not till I got home, and I'm like, wait a minute, this isn't a comic book. This is prose. What?
Yeah,
But
Infinite Crisis is not coherent.
no, it's even less coherent in prose because so many chapters are like, and then Uncle Sam showed up. He looked like this, and he had 12 other people who looked like this, and then a bunch of supervillains came and fucking murdered them.
Oh God, yeah, Jesus, yeah. Jeff Johns is he's a better writer than that, but he's also the guy who did Doomsday Clock, so fuck him.
Oh boy, but yeah, to go back to My Adventures with Superman, bad ending. Oh, the evil fascist Superman who went bad because the Joker killed Lois Lane or some shit, and little John Kent is like, no, we need to hug you. We don't need to defeat you. Yeah.
And keep in mind, the premise that it sets up is not injustice bullshit, but rather John Kent returning to the New Jersey crime boss Ultraman, not to be confused with the Jesus Christ of Japan Ultraman.
Of course.
And who basically had him in a volcano for for a period of time after he went on adventures with his grandfather, who was alive for reasons that are never explained.
Right.
And that have something Dr. Manhattan.
Oh Lord.
And then he also, in the original Brian Michael Bendis run where this event happens, it's implied that they had Doctor Who adventures for a couple of years before the final adventure being John Kent gets stuck in a volcano, whereas the Tom Taylor comic implies, if not outright states, his entire time was in that volcano.
Well,
I have not read the Tom Taylor run, and I do not intend to read the Tom Taylor run, because a friend of mine showed me the pages from the first issue of that run involving a school shooter going to shoot up a school with bullets that say, "Thoughts and prayers."
oh my God. Oh, that has aged even more poorly. This fucking Luigi. Oh no.
Yeah. Also, John Kent has a boyfriend.
Yeah.
And who they broke up because John Kent decided to date a trans girl who was responsible for said boyfriend's parents being murdered.
The one good thing I could have said about the John Kent book you had me read is, oh, he's got a boyfriend. Good. That's nice.
Yeah, it's very much DC Comics is very much not good with anything.
Womp
Like, they'll
womp.
let you have good artists and be interesting, but they will not be good.
And then they have Harley Quinn do a Pog champ face in this book.
Yeah.
Why? Can we talk about a comic from a really good person? Like a really good comic writer like Grant Morrison?
Or Grant Morrison, Fraser Irving's Annihilator, which is a book about Max Landis being haunted by his imaginary friend, who may or may not be God.
Yeah, this was a wild one. It's definitely a lot about what you bring to an adaptation of an IP. Because there's this guy who's like, what? Nomax?
Max Nomax is the fictional character. The guy is Ray Space.
Yeah. Nomax is this whole thing that goes back to French pulp novels, and there have been all sorts of...
It's riffing on Phantomos, which in turn got riffed on by Donald Duck as Phantomalad, or Paperinik.
Oh, that's
or
cute.
the Duck Avenger.
Oh, that's cute. I mean, I don't know, but I watched Darkwing Duck when I was a child. That's about all I have on that. But yeah, this was very interesting, and what you bring to an IP as a creator and whatnot. And it turns out what Ray Spaz brings is being a piece of shit.
Yeah, it's also quite possibly the most successful interpretation of William Blake's The Four Zoas.
Oh God.
Yeah. So anyway, we have Kate Beaton, author of Hark a Vagrant, wherein Wonder Woman kicks Nazis all the time. I didn't have you read Hark a Vagrant. I had to read Ducks, 2 years in the oil sands.
Oh, poor Kate Beaton.
As I describe it, it's the oh boy one.
That's a who boy one for sure. I mean, yeah. Kate Beaton,
It's
I mean, you read her backstory in this, and it does feel very much like, the way I grew up, because we both came from these small, little, middle of nowhere towns on a secluded bay, but, well, hers was in Nova Scotia, mine was in Newfoundland, so there's a distinct difference there, and I never went out to the oil fields, but even if I did, I wouldn't have had as rough a time of it as Kate Beaton had.
Yeah. Did you ever consider it?
No, not really.
Yeah, it's really a striking work that uses the two tones effectively. Like it's only blue and white.
Yeah.
And there are some moments of true beauty that highlight the Canadian landscape.
I mean, I really love the seascapes of rural Nova Scotia, but I've never been out west. The furthest I've been is like Quebec City, but there's a lovely splash page of like seeing Aurora Borealis in Alberta, which is really striking. There's beauty there. It's not a total shithole, but nevertheless, terrible things happen here.
Yeah, and once again, we return to the idea of the nature versus the Twin Peaks stuff that we're talking about.
Yeah.
It's about people drilling up this beautiful land and all the horrors that are allowed to happen because of that.
And once again, it is depicting a sexual assault with a horrific fucking clarity and style and in a style. Just the way that things fade out and fade back to that beach after the fact. It's an absolutely fucking heartbreaking book.
Yep. And on that note, we have our last work that involves sexual assault, Al Moore and Eddie Campbell's From Hell.
Yeah, this is a hefty book, to be sure. And it's definitely one that, of course, we are coming to in a particular way, because we are both, in fact, the reason that we're talking right now is because of the works of Elizabeth Sandifer. And so when I got to the chapter of From Hell, when, what's his name? The guy, the Ripper.
Gull.
When Gull is doing a psychogeography of Victorian London, I'm like, wait a fucking minute!
Yeah. Admittedly, Elle got into this aspect of Al Moore's work via his spoken word pieces and didn't entirely get From Hell until John Higgs wrote about it in his book on the KLF, which I highly recommend.
Oh, yeah. Nice. But yeah, this is the 20th century. I have delivered it.
I think that this might be one of my favorite comics by Alan Moore. Have you read any Alan Moore other than this?
Watchmen, and funny thing I mentioned Elle. I once asked her, how do you understand alchemy? And she told me, read Promethea.
Yeah, that tracks. Promethea is very much a lecture comic, though, as we'll talk about in a bit, not the best kind of lecture comic.
Mm-hmm. But I really did like how this comic did portray, the act of becoming history itself, of making history. And yet the ending does show that even though the Ripper has become history, his victims have the same power too. And in the end, during Gull's final vision, they are able to banish him away and say, get away from this place. This is our space. You don't belong here.
Yeah, there's only so far you can go with Jack the Ripper. It's an entrenched circle. All that features a lot of interesting people, from Wild Bill to the Elephant Man. Say, did you watch that movie?
I did watch that movie. I said at the top, it's a very good film.
No, you said that The Straight Story was a very good film.
No. Well, The Elephant Man is a very good film as well.
Yeah, that film has a lot of importance to me. That
fucking the scene when all those hooligans break into his room and are like, that's as upsetting as anything that happens to Laura Palmer.
Yeah.
God.
David Lynch has a love of people. Well, he is an optimistic, hopeful person, but he is understanding of the sheer horror that people are capable of.
Yeah.
So originally, the next one was going to be Social Fiction by Chantal Montelier, which is a brilliant work of black and white science fiction. But after From Hell, you asked me, hey, can I have less works with sexual assault in them? And I found 2 works that on the remaining list that had sexual assault in them.
Well.
And so I cut them.
And you swapped out for a delightful one in this first slot.
Mary Tyler Moorhawk by Dave Baker.
The House of Leaves of comic books.
If I'm being honest, this didn't fully work for me. I get it. I get what I was trying to do, but it just felt a bit too cute, if that makes sense.
I get where you're coming from there. I don't know if it fully landed with me, but I get it. Like, the idea is that instead of... Because House of Leaves is an infamous book that nests itself in a labyrinth of either pretentious parody of academia or just straight up going crazy. But what this does, instead of that, is it replaces it with backstory. So, like, everything you see has a footnote that's like, oh, here's the backstory of this guy. It's Captain Nomad with his laser ray, blah, 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 blah. I'm just making shit off the top of my head, and it just bombards you with that. It clearly took a lot to make. It just bombards you with this lore and footnotes.
Yeah.
But the other half of the book is interesting. The half that's essays about trying to find the fictional Dave Baker who created this multimedia franchise in this strange dystopian future.
Yeah, written by Dave Baker, in a comic by Dave Baker.
Mm-hmm. A strange bit of recursion, but the way the two halves mix is actually quite interesting. And I do like that it's again two-tone, it's all washed in bubblegum pink when you get to the comic half. It is very cute. And I think at the end it's trying to say something about, the swirl of continuity and lore and what that means.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On that note, we have one of the great comics artists of all time, Will Eisner. Originally, I had you read his seminal work, A Contract with God. But then I checked and found out that there's actually a chapter in A Contract with God, or at least the trilogy, not necessarily the original story, wherein a character gets sexually assaulted.
Yikes.
Yeah, Will Eisner is very much somebody who is conscious about the social realities of the world, if not necessarily the skin tones of people. There is a bit in Contract with God where a nasty girl gets a guy killed because she lies about being assaulted by him.
Oh,
so,
no.
Some of the politics of the 60s and 70s generation are a bit mixed. But in any case, I had you read the plot, which is honestly a better essay comic than anything Alan Moore has ever attempted. It truly captures the relationship between visuals and prose instead of bombarding you with 5,000 words of text.
Yeah, it does a good job of that, and it's got a good message of attempting to thoroughly debunk this anti-Semitic horse shit that is going. And yet, at the end, you had to be ever vigilant, because there are so many points in this book where people debunk the thing, and they're like, oh, well, that's anti-Semitism sorted out. Cut to the future when it resurges.
Yep.
So
just because you say it's full of shit doesn't mean people will actually go, but is it full of shit?
And that's why you have to be ever vigilant about these things and, stamp them out. But, as we keep alluding to with David Lynch, if I may quote, it is happening again.
It is happening again.
And it keeps happening, and you just have to stamp it out when it happens. This is what you have to do. You're not. It's not going to be. Well, there's a heavy influence, a big scene in this book that's just taking point by point this one essay from the French guy in the Napoleonic age, and the guy who actually wrote the thing, and just saying, okay, this is clearly plagiarized, or this is just bullshit.
Yeah, truly brilliant work of nonfiction comics writing. On a related note, we have Material by Alice Cott and Will Tempest,
I
which
really
I
liked
am
this book.
I am disappointed we didn't get more than one volume of this.
Yeah, I really, really liked this book. It's very neat. And the way that it just intercuts between these four little narratives in really interesting way. It's almost like perfect match cutting in cinema, but in comic form.
Yeah. For those of you who haven't read, because it's out of print to the point where not even the piracy sites have it anymore, Material is a comic about the modern day, focusing on four disparate stories. One being about a college professor who is interacting with a sentient AI. Another is about a young black kid being press ganged by the police to rat out the new Black Panther Party. Another is about a Hollywood actress trying to get her start while doing cocaine. And the fourth is about a survivor of Guantanamo Bay having an affair with a BDSM practitioner.
Yeah, it's a really good book.
Yeah.
And they even have four little essays right at the end of it, and each one is themed around the specific themes of a segment of the comic.
Yeah, these were originally published as part of the back matter for each issue, so the comic only had 4 issues get released.
Yeah.
And it's again extremely disappointing that only 4 got released.
Yeah, it's a shame.
You can see you can really see the potential of the comics industry in this and its usage of the 9-panel grid.
Oh yeah, the grid. I haven't been talking much about the grid here.
Yeah,
but
I mean, we did talk about an Alan Moore work.
Yeah, I mean Alan Moore and the grid are synonymous.
Yeah. And speaking of somebody who is somewhat synonymous with the 9-panel grid, Danger Street by Tom King and Jorge Fornes, or as I like to call it, the Sicko's book.
The Sicko's book. This was weird. Yeah. This was strange. I mean, it feels like it should be going right up its own ass with lore. It's like the entire thing is, hey, here's as much obscure 70s DC continuities we could dig up thrown into one book.
Yeah. It helps that Tom King is a proper writer and Jorge Fornes is a great artist. It's like you basically have somebody who is not going, okay, this lore is important in and of itself. No, this isn't important. This is nobody gives a fuck about the outsiders. or the green team.
It's an interesting book. It's very we've been talking about Lynch and Twin Peaks a lot, but part of what makes Twin Peaks great as well is his collaboration with Mark Frost, and this feels very Frostian in a way. It's got this grand tapestry of the history of America.
Yeah, not necessarily the history of America in this one at least, but very much one that engages with the various people of the world. Yeah, it engages with the small town, and not just all this is important, this matters, and all that. Yeah. It's ultimately, as the ending notes, the meaning is put on by you.
I mean, the entire thing of, who decides who's rich and who's poor? Oh, some asked, it was decided by a children's game. It's just arbitrary. And also, the entire issue that's just a fucking sword fight.
Yeah, I fucking love this. Okay, this is formless bullshit at its best, and oh my god, it's delightful. Like, it's a philosophical debate that's also a fight scene. That's structured so that way each panel has the characters talking only in their respective panels.
It is. That is art right there.
Yeah, but you also have other delightful moments. Like, one of the main characters is literally just a Tucker Carlson by way of Ralph Meeker. So he's simultaneously extremely horrifying as a human being, but also pathetic as fuck.
Oh, God.
Like, when we have the 9-panel sequence where he's delivering his pitch for what his news channel could be like, and he's doing all this, the communists and the outsiders and the lefties who don't know real America. And then he just breaks down after his podcast is done, and he's just this meek, pathetic guy. Oh, God.
God almighty. Well, we're getting near the end of these now.
Yep. Up next we have The Angry One, which is 2023's best comic, 20th Century Men, by Dennis Camp and Scipion Morian.
Yeah, okay, this is where we get the tapestry of American imperialism.
Yep. The story of the Cold War is usually told through the lens of who is better, America or Russia? And the heart of it is they were both imperialistic powers out to overthrow each other.
Yep. It's just a really ugly fucking book.
Yeah. Not to say that Scipion Morian is a bad artist. He is brilliant. He is doing brilliant work.
I love the issue. I love the issue with the Soviet journalist going through just absolute hell.
Yeah. Yeah, and then it's truly disturbing artwork done by one of the great artists. Like, I've seen him do his art live, and it is mesmerizing to see him at work.
Mm-hmm. And at the end of it all, it's like the final issue is like, no, it's not the American story. It's not the Soviet story. This is our story. The story of the people of Afghanistan.
Yeah, it's very much a story about who gets to tell the story and what doesn't matter.
Mm-hmm. It's a very strong comic, though.
Yeah. And after that, I add 2 more on there because I realized, we need to have a proper climax to this. One of them was called We Owe Them. And that was We're in a Prophecy by the aforementioned Elizabeth Sandifer and her husband, Penn Wiggins.
What a book. Yeah. I mean,
Margaret Thatcher's head gets cut off by imperialistic fairies.
That rules. That absolutely rules. It's a little intimidating to, talk about Ellsworth, considering, I am just a little dipshit Andrew who 10 years ago was like, oh, hey, can I continue your Nintendo blog? Oh, sure, whatever, nerd. And now here I am. But Britain of Prophecy was really striking and wonderful.
Yeah.
And it again is about who gets to tell the story. And in the end, and of course, given that it's 2 queer people telling the story, you're getting, we should fucking tell the story.
Yeah, it's very much about marginalized people and the systems of power. Like, it's there are very much queer fascists in the book. Like, the main baddie is a queer fascist who kills his boyfriend to cement his power of fascism. Yeah,
I mean, just as based as cutting off the head of Margaret Thatcher is, it's sort of moot if you then go, and now I get to crush the heels of my enemies.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can really see Penn Wiggins' art style grow over the course of the book. Like, dear God, the shadow work on the final issue is very good. Like, you talk about the sequence where the 9-panel grid starts to build.
Yeah, that's great. And I noticed this going back, too, when I was covering. And it was a contrast in what was then the penultimate issue, is that the scenes with the queer fae fascists are done in the grid, and then the following scene, which is just tender love between a queer fae and her trans girlfriend, just the grid is not there. Melts away.
Yeah, this is actually an intentional... Yeah, this was always intended by L. The main baddie is the Aeon of Days.
Ancient of Days, I think.
Ancient of Days, yeah. Which is a print by William Blake, which was made into a print by William Blake depicting Urizen. Mm-hmm. And so it's about... the grid is representing order and structure upon which that fascism runs on.
Exactly. And so you have the opposition to that, which is no grid. And in that aforementioned fight scene we mentioned where the grid is being built, it's a fight against the Fed. So they're trying to build this grid, and you're trying to express yourself panel by panel, page by page, and building that is really striking.
Yep. So after that, we had the final book of this. One more final, I Need You, which is me being a cheeky Evangelion fan. Taiyo Matsumoto's Tokyo These Days, which is one of the great mangas. Like, I read this and went, fuck me, I need everyone to read this.
It's lovely, and it's a perfect finale to this, because it is a manga about people who make manga, and just asking the question, why do they do it? Despite all the hardship and grinding, and I mean, I don't know about the comics industry, but I know that the manga industry, and especially poor mangaka, are like worked to the fucking bone.
Yeah,
just the culture.
Yeah, we've actually been having this conversation recently where fetishization of work life balance being destroyed in favor of all work all the time, or you're fucked. Like Greg Capullo a few months back said something along the lines of, if you can't do comics all the time, don't do comics. You need to be obsessed with comics and never have a life. Like, die for the pen.
Same as it ever was. But no, this is a very sweet book. Just about old hands reminiscing and saying, man, why do I do it? Why did I devote so much of my life to it? And the answer is just because I had a story to tell. Because it gives me meaning.
I love the industry.
And it's just about this old disillusioned editor and getting all these old hands together and creating a comic anthology.
Yeah, it's very good work and uses the black and white exceptionally well.
Just lovely sketch work. Yeah. And you had some nice. You really liked my article on it, which thank you very much. So yeah. Apparently I did well. So I must have learned something over 14 months of doing these comics.
Yeah, well, you keep at it, you keep practicing, and you keep making it better.
It's the same as I've been doing. I mean, my writing is better now than it was in 2020, and that was better than it was in 2015, and you just keep improving at it. I can already feel myself in 2024. I can feel my work getting better, and hopefully I can maintain that. But, well, those were the comics I read for the Comics Challenge. So, anything else, Sean?
Do you have a favorite?
I would probably go with Unflattening for just the way that it really helped me understand this. But as an actual, like, narrative comic, I will go with I'll go with the top three. I'd go with Shubiek Lubiek, then Material, and Tokyo These Days.
Okay. Would you be interested in doing this again?
Maybe. I know you have some plans.
Yeah, I have two lists that are potential. I have a couple of lists. One is basically just challenge mode, wherein I fuck with you with the most difficult comics ever.
Uh-huh.
Or one is just a base introduction to superhero comics. It's, the big two that I've purposely been avoiding with this project, just so that way we didn't have to go, all of comics are just superhero comics. No, comics are wide and fascinating medium. There's more to it than just superhero comics, but superhero comics are a part of it, so I could give you some superhero comics.
I mean, it's like...
Then there's the...
I was going to say, then it's like how you were inspired by this by my Criterion Challenge, where I was like, okay, let's get away from like franchise movies and talk about some weird artsy things. And I mean, even in that, I covered stuff like a Godzilla picture, so it's not all artsy fartsy movies, but it is about broadening your horizons, and I feel my horizons were broadened by your selections in this slate.
Then there's the Dark Dementis list, which is basically... So superhero comics are bad, and you should feel bad and die horribly.
Well, one of the superhero comics I had to read for this was quite bad, yes.
Yeah, these are worse.
These are worse, apparently. But we'll see about those. I mean, I'm in an interesting groove of writing where I got one I should be writing about that one show, and then there's another show I was watching that was like, that was going to be for me, and then I was like, ooh, this is really inspiring me. Maybe I should write about that. And then there's the big one that I want to go after next. So I got a lot going, but we'll see. But is there anything else, Sean, or shall I ask the question?
Yeah, there's also a cinema list that I pair superhero movies with various works of cinema, ranging from Time Crimes to The Sea of the Sacred Fig to The Omen.
Oh yeah. Hmm.
And if you do that, I will go to Canada and try poutine.
Poutine. I mean, you don't need to do it to I mean, you don't need to go to Canada to try the poutine.
Just go to Canada. Yeah, I wanted to go to Canada, so why not?
Oh, yeah. Well, you figure out a nice part of it to go to. I mean, is there anything else?
I mean, did you enjoy the experience?
I did enjoy the experience. Like I said, broadening horizons. It helps me, sharpen up as a creator, critiquer, writer. So definitely helped. And I mean, I learned a lot, especially from unflattering. So thank you for that. I mean, I know you're really honed as a comics critic, but I like to think I did an okay job.
All right. Well, if that's all, I guess I'm gonna be hang out. So farewell, Frezno.
Hey, wait a minute.
Damn it.
All right, it's time. I get to really savor asking the question. And sitting here to hear the answer, I don't know if we're gonna have to split this into two because it gets long or what, because of the thing. But we'll see. We'll see how we go. But Sean Dillon, my pal and comics critic, I would like to ask you a question. Why is David Lynch's The Straight Story the best Star Trek movie ever made?
What is utopia? Is evolution. A progression from eternity to liberty, then equality, and finally, fraternity. A collective of individuals dedicated to the betterment of each other, a brotherhood of all men. It is you and it is me. Forever. For a few years now, I've been tormenting my good friend Freezing Inferno with the prospect that The Straight Story is the greatest Star Trek movie ever made. There is, on some level, a degree of mirth to this assessment. After all, The Straight Story is neither a work within the Star Trek property, nor a work of science fiction. And still, I claim that it is the best of all the Star Trek movies. With regards to the Star Trek movies themselves, if I'm being completely honest, I've not really cared much for them. In truth, I've only seen 5 of them. Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, Star Trek 2009, Star Trek Into Darkness, and Star Trek Beyond. The first of these, The Wrath of Khan, I believe I watched at some point during middle school. At the time, my primary interest in older cinema came from perusing the shelves of my local library for whatever struck my interest, be it the McCarthyian comedy Clue, the sex comedy MASH, or the inexplicably charming chase film Grand Theft Auto. So eventually, I decided to check out a copy of Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. It might have been because I saw an ad for the 2009 film and wanted to see more of this Star Trek thing I heard about from Futurama. My sci-fi growing up was more Twilight Zone, and to a lesser extent, The Outer Limits, including the late 90s, early 2000s attempt, than Star Trek. I remember the case for the film being silver and slightly unable to be completely closed. The disc itself seemed normal, though I do recall having to clean it a little bit before putting it in. The disc would eventually reveal itself to be slightly scratched, so I think I had to skip about 30 seconds of the climax, though I could be mixing up with Galaxy Quest. More on in a moment. When I finished the movie, I reacted to it similarly to how I reacted to the Sam Raimi Spider-Man films growing up. It was fine. I didn't love the film the way I did MASH, A Clockwork Orange, or Dawn of the Dead, but I didn't hate it the way I did Shark Tale or Epic Movie. It was a perfectly serviceable work of science fiction. Curiously, I would later have a similar reaction to another work of beloved science fiction with a main villain who is dressing up as another race.
Oh dear God! I'm just remembering my particular experience with Star Trek. Well, I'd seen Star Wars first in off order, but the relative I was borrowing these tapes from was more of a Star Trek fan, and So I started watching from their video collection. So the first one I saw was Star Trek: The Motion Picture, which blew me the fuck away. And I just remember, Wrath of Khan is fine. There are a lot of Star Trek fans who will call it God's gift to science fiction. I don't think I'll go that far, but neither do I say, it's a piece of shit, overrated hype. It's good. It's a good movie. It's a good sci-fi movie.
I don't really remember the actual experience of watching the film. If I have the timing right, in 2008, 2009, our family still had the thick television set in my family room. It wasn't the massive cube that my grandparents had. We wouldn't get that until after I started freshman year of high school, which would in turn be replaced with a flat screen during senior year, the television proper being moved to my room. But it was a decent enough sized television, full screen, so the image was probably cropped, unless I wanted to watch something extremely tiny. I'd watch it again to see if my feelings on it had changed, but I don't have access to either MGM or Paramount Plus. About a year or so later, I saw the 2009 version of Star Trek. This was right at the cusp of the superhero craze when there were other films in the cinemas other than Batman's and Spider-Man's and the like. I had recently begun wearing glasses after an attempt to be a caddy that went about absolutely nowhere other than me starting to wear glasses. I had a lot of fun with that first movie, though I couldn't tell you a thing that happened, or even which theater I saw it in. Though I thought my mom, my brother, and I, went to the one in the mall, but it could have been the one beside the mall. But when I checked with my brother, who's been keeping track of all the movies he's seen since 2008, it was actually in the AMC in Portchester. I remember seeing Inglourious Basterds later that summer in the AMC in Portchester rather than the abysmal viewing of Transformers Revenge of the Fallen in the Regal IMAX over in New Rochelle, then the only IMAX in the area. But I have no memories of seeing Star Trek 2009 in theaters. My strongest memory of the film happened in 2013 during my senior year of high school. As part of a field trip for a physics class I was taking, we went down to Six Flags Great Adventure. I'd only been to the park previously in 2005 with my aunt. I'd done Hurricane Harbor multiple times and the in-car safari once. But the Six Flags Park proper was a rare experience. Mainly due to me not really vibing with thrill rides that go upside down, especially after attempting one at an annual fair at my elementary school hosted where I tried to ride a ride called the Salt and Pepper Shaker at the age of 6 or 7. Basically, the ride is you have four sets of steel cages that flip upside down in a tower. So you're shaken like a salt and pepper shaker. But I've been extremely excited to go to the park because I had heard a lot of interesting things about this ride called El Toro. When I was growing up, I would obsess over advertisements for theme parks and activities. Every time my family went on a long car ride to visit my grandparents or my aunt in Pennsylvania, or even visiting my dad's side of the family in New York City, I would find all the brochures for plays, parks, and theme parks. I even have the Florida Disney DVD on order every year. But I was still intrigued by El Toro, one of the largest wooden roller coasters in the world. I wanted to ride it. I was also intrigued by King Ka, but I was too chicken shit to ride that one. When the time came, I immediately ran to the line for El Toro and was on either the second or third ride of the day. I sat next to a girl roughly my age who I did not know and would not see ever again. As we began our descent, I began to sing the chorus to Iron Man's The Trooper. As you plunge into certain death! I think the girl next to me gave me a weird look, though I didn't notice or care. I still have a tendency of singing while on rides, most notably being later that summer when me, my brother, and some friends of ours went to the local fair and did a zero-gravity ride, which spins you so fast you basically float out of the ground. And I inexplicably sang the My Little Pony theme song, a show I still have not watched a single episode of, despite being intrigued by the arts and reviews of the Boy community at the time. It was shortly after the first drop of El Toro that my glasses flew off my face and onto the floor by my seat. As we rushed up the peaks and down the valleys, my glasses flew out of the car. I lost my glasses and had to spend the entire day essentially blind. I have enough clarity of vision to move around, but I couldn't really make out the details. So when we took our bus back to later that day, I could only listen to what was happening in Star Trek 2009, despite asking to watch it against the alternative of, I think, Twilight? For completion's sake, I did watch the other two films of the Abrams verse in theaters, though likewise I have no real memories of it. In truth, most of my cinematic memories tend to be massive horror stories. For example, in 2012, my brother, a mutual friend of ours, though more my brother's friend than my own, and I went to see the movie John Carter at the AMC in Portchester. There, we sat in the back row back when when you had to pick your seats based off of what was available in the theater, not pre-select seats. Seats we were sat behind this extremely angry guy who was glaring at us before the trailers had even started because we were talking. He then his attention towards a bunch of kids our age having fun in the corner. He approached the kids and basically threatened to beat the stuffing out of them. This went into the opening scenes of the film, wherein the police approached the man and his family, and they all made a scene about how they were blameless and it was the kids in the corner who should be arrested. If I'm remembering things correctly, the kids were black. So, I don't really have any strong feelings about these two Star Trek films. They were a fun time to watch, but not much else. Sure, I know there are several things wrong with Into Darkness, and I generally do agree with them, but I couldn't be mustered to have an opinion at the time, or even now Beyond. It was alright. I did have more fun with Beyond, but it was very much a perfectly serviceable, dare I say good, American blockbuster. It didn't restore my faith in humanity the way Shin Ultraman did, but I had fun. And really, what more can you ask of a film?
Yeah, Beyond is it's under. I would call Beyond an underrated Star Trek film. It's definitely the best of that batch, the Kelvin films, let's call them. Definitely the best one.
You'll note that I skipped The Undiscovered Country. That's because my in for that film was in the form of one of my two major influences when it comes to Star Trek, SF Debris. I thought the film was fine, a bit better than Wrath of Khan. In many regards, a lot of my engagement with culture can be understood through the lens of criticism. I have a massive love of the field to the point where, after my dreams of becoming a director imploded after a rather disastrous film shoot involving me being locked out of the high school by the class's golden child, I wanted to be a critic when I grew up. Being in high school, I spent a lot of time watching reviews from people on the scene, from those of Channel Awesome Family like Booney or the Nostalgia Critic, to more obscure figures like Browncoat Eric or Confused Matthew. I found out about SF Debris through, of all people, Linkara. My current thoughts on the latter are a bit mixed, not helped by research I'm doing for what is looking more and more likely to be a book. But in May of 2010, I was rather on board with the whole reviewer thing he was doing. In particular, I quite liked Linkara's series, History of Power Rangers, whose entry on Power Rangers in Space ended with a montage set to David Bowie and Queen's hit song, Under Pressure. At the time, and still today, I was a massive classic rock head. While I had yet to do deep dives into either Queen or Bowie, I nevertheless liked the use of the song here. Shortly after the montage was complete, Linkar mentioned that he got the idea and permission from SF Debris. So, being the curious sort to read the Divine Comedy in 8th grade because a God of War clone was going to be made out of its first volume, I decided to check the guy out. Truthfully, I still have a fondness for the man's work, even as I ultimately do not agree with his vision of Star Trek, or, for that matter, the Shin Evangelion films, but that's a whole other conversation. Whenever I look back at his work, I often find myself gravitating away from the main draw of Star Trek and toward his other work. For example, he wrote a rather chilling take on the origin of Santa Claus that fits within the grim tradition of folk stories that I still think about to this day. His retrospective look on the rise and fall of Cape Comics and deep dives into the histories of the Hulk or Thanos are well informed and delightful bits of criticism. And I'm rather charmed by his abridged Let's Plays of Star Wars The Old Republic.
I just wanted to say about SF Debris. I liked his trilogy about George Lucas and the making of Star Wars and all that. That was an interesting series that he did. I have a fondness for SF debris. But please, continue.
The problem, and I find this with a lot of critics of that era, and one not many of them have been able to shed, is that he never actually made me want to watch the things he was describing. The closest was perhaps the Doctor Who story, The Enemy of the World, which was a rather delightful spy thriller that I quite loved when it was found. But despite everything he said about Star Trek or Farscape or Babylon 5, I never wanted to watch these shows. Looking back, I think there are two reasons for this. Firstly, there's the nature of his review schedule. As if Debris approaches the show from all eras of Star Trek, less in chronological order, the way, to use one of SF Debris' descendants, Paparina would the Animorphs book series. For example, in the image Linkar provides to advertise SF Debris' channel, we can see that the three most recent videos uploaded were TNG's The Best of Both Worlds Part 1, released June 18th, 1990, TNG's The Measure of Man, released February 13th, 1989, and Voyager's One Small Step, released November 17th, 1999. This, in turn, creates a shuffling effect to the episodes, removing them from their context. It treats them as standalone objects rather than works that build off of one another. One such case is the episode of Deep Space Nine, In the Pale Moonlight. In the review, SF Debris highlights the ways in which it demonstrates moral complexity within the character of Sisko. However, when placed in the context of Deep Space Nine as a whole, rather than as a singular feature, that moral complexity becomes muddled with episodes prior that show Sisko heroically doing worse actions and subsequent episodes failing to live up to the relatively meager bar in the Pale Moonlight set. The effect, then, is that the works become weightless and, subsequently, easily disregarded. This brings us to the second reason, that being the tone of the works SF Debris and his contemporaries. Mainly, the mid-2000s and early 2010s were rife with snarky reviewers who frequently approached the various mediums with a degree of contempt. Look at how weird this bad comic where Superman fights twin clones of Hitler. How silly Kirk is when he reads the Declaration of Independence aloud. How faggy Batman is when he wears rubber and has bat nipples. Any attempt at sincerity has to be countered with a joking quip or something that goes along the lines of, nah. This has several negative impacts on the overall world stage, none of which are SF Debris' fault. It was a culture of the post-90s, post-9/11 landscape where the so-called end of history turned out to be a wet fart. Indeed, it's telling that the videos by SF Debris that I like and that I still gravitate towards are the ones that are more sincere and engage with the larger culture and context from which they came from. Perhaps the intention with this shuffling of episodes approach was to emulate the way many people encounter Star Trek back when SF Debris first started, mainly by watching episodes late at night on UPN. Indeed, this was how I actually saw my first Star Trek television story, Elementary, My Dear Data. It was back during my junior year of high school. Small TV that used to be in my parents' bedroom was moved into my room after they got a flat screen for the downstairs and moved the box to their bedroom. I was flipping through channels one night, in I think October, for what reason I can't say, when I came across one called UPN, now called My 9 in my area. Yeah, the channel was airing an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation, Elementary, My Dear Data. Well, okay, they were airing the final minute or two of a different episode that I don't remember. At the time, I had a rather fond appreciation for the character of Sherlock Holmes, helped mainly by the second series of Sherlock and the Guy Ritchie adaptation of the character, as well as the animated series Sherlock Holmes in the 22nd Century, which is a childhood favorite of mine.
Oh,
And
God, I remember that.
Yeah. And having nothing better to do, I decided to give that episode a watch. The story tells of Data, Geordi LaForge, and Dr. Pulaski going on an adventure in the holodeck to demonstrate Data's sentience to the rather problematic Doctor. Said adventure takes the form of a Sherlock Holmes LARP with Data as the titular detective, which results in Moriarty gaining sentience. Among the interesting aspects of the episode is the notion that the holodeck can create life. Usually in these sorts of stories, there is a tachyon beam storm of destiny in the Bermuda Triangle galaxy causing photon particles to reverse the polarity of the neutron flow, corrupting the K-urium running the holodeck with Carsonium-D, causing the ship to go haywire. But instead, the holodeck is functioning perfectly. Given the nature of this episode, the episodes to engage with the sentience of artificial life, it's notable that when Data and Jory initially confront Moriarty, it's Data who immediately clocks what's going on. Throughout the episode, Brent Spiner utilizes a rather charming Basil Rathbone impression when playing the role of Sherlock Holmes. Or, more accurately, Spiner plays Data doing a Basil Rathbone impression when playing the role of Sherlock Holmes. But as soon as Moriarty walks in and implies that he knows about the fictionality of his existence, Data breaks character. We aren't told that Data has figured it out through dialogue or musical stings. The episode trusts us to understand from the acting choices Spiner is making that Data has. And yet, Star Trek, even in its next generation, was never my show. Perhaps it's because my local library didn't have the episodes or it was airing at a regular time like The Simpsons was. This was back when Netflix was only starting to be a thing and was still sending DVDs to people who asked for them. So I didn't have access to the entire backlog of Star Trek. Indeed, I wouldn't catch another bit of Star Trek until a few years later, during my freshman year of college, when I was at my grandparents' house flipping through channels and catching the back half of the episode Conundrum. The episode in question involves the crew of the Enterprise getting amnesia and having to figure out who they are while traveling to do a secret mission of high importance. The mystery aspect of this episode fascinated me. Who are we when we remove all the baggage? Can we truly can we trust that we'd make the same decisions when the time comes? Or would we assume our functions, our jobs are ourselves, and, in turn, commit acts of pure cruelty? I would not recognize it then, but I see this as a fascinating layer to Star Trek's essence, at least for me. A contradiction between utopian idealism and military aestheticism. Oftentimes it results in one winning out over the other, usually the militarism, and one can fairly read the utopianism as being kin to the liberalism that resulted in Joe Biden being perfectly okay with Israel pushing its colonialist project to a cataclysmic climax. Sorry. But at the same time, that disjunct between the two, when forced together and put at odds, as opposed to the work of Robert Heinlein, where militarism was utopian, intrigues me. I suppose it's time to bring up another influence upon my understanding of Star Trek, L.I. Underhill's Vodka Rangi. I had first encountered Underhill through Tumblr. Despite creating the account in 2011, I only began to actively use it in late 2013, shortly before the Doctor Who 50th anniversary special, The Day of the Doctor. I do not recall what made me create a Tumblr in the first place. What spurred me to actually use a Tumblr, however, was a blog that I had started following earlier that year called Tarsa Ritorum. I had been introduced to the blog via an AV Club review of The Mind Robber, which recommended it to me. Being the sort to dive into things, I took the site's recommendation and my college freshman self was inspired. So I should note that I was finishing high school at the time I discovered Tarsa Ritorum. The baffling part was that I should have been introduced to the blog via my love of Andrew Hickey, whose work on Seven Soldiers basically inspired me to be a critic after the aforementioned sharing of my dreams of being a director. If I had a nickel for every time I should have been introduced to a critic sooner than I was, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it's happened twice. The other was, curiously, SF Debris. Following a post mentioning she had Tumblr or some other thing, I began following other people. First, I engaged with some people I knew via TV tropes or DeviantArt before following people they and Tarsa Ritorum author Elizabeth Sandifer were following. Among these people was L.I. Underhill, who was in the midst of a project called Vakarangi. I think they were just about to do Dirty Pair when I started reading the blog. Apparently, I was rather dismissive of the prospect of Dirty Pair being covered. I don't recall this, though I do recall being dismissive of Hi Puffy Ami Yumi in a conversation with them, which Underhill noted vibed with Dirty Pair. I think I was dealing with a lot of anxiety of having some kid mock me for liking girly things, Powerpuff Girls, and overcompensating for a while.
I can't imagine what that sort of thing would do to somebody, and I'm totally not speaking from experience. Ha 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 ha. But yeah, Underhill's great.
Vakarangi was a personal journey through Star Trek, though later conversations with the author would indicate their preference to talk about just the TNG and early DS9 eras of Trek. There were several entries that explored the show via a more personal lens, childhood memories of playing with character TNG dolls or watching specific episodes, and I absolutely vibed with the project. What especially intrigued me was the numerous instances of structural trickery. I have had a long love of structural devilry in criticism and other works, from Andrew Hickey swinging back and forth between some bonkers science and the origins of pop music, to talk about Grant Morrison et al.'s Mr. Miracle, to Elizabeth Sandifer engaging with the novel Interference via having multiple threads constantly interrupt each other, to the numerous instances of Channel Awesome creators using the review to engage with why they even do it in the first place. Okay, so there's this one that I'm remembering off the top of my head that was Fed the Sage did a review of the anime Violence Check, which is extremely gory and violent and horrible in the way that you can't really show on YouTube without being demonetized and having the video removed for or standards and practices reasons. That basically devolves into the making of a video and why do you do this sort of art? Why do you create criticism about goofy anime shit? Bakurangi likewise engaged in this mode, most notably in the form of Twine-style choose-your-own-adventure entries where multiple episodes would be covered at once. In truth, I was aware that there was a storytelling aspect to this blog, a time war occurring in the background, but I wasn't invested in it, most likely because I had entered into the project midway through and hadn't read every single post. To be fair, I still haven't read all of Tarsa Ritorum either. What kept me along was Underhill's voice when writing their articles. The way they expressed their memories, their love, their disappointment, and hatred within Star Trek fueled me with a desire to actually dive into the show. Not enough to do a complete deep dive into the show, but enough to give a sample plot where they provided a try. Their writing style felt really special, to the point where, when I began my own blog project, I would jokingly refer to it as a massive knockoff of Sandifer, Hickey, and Underhill. The majority of it being Underhill. I would nick a structural trick they did wherein 3 posts would act as as engaging with the core themes of the project going forward, as well as fail miserably at creating a twine post. But in truth, my relationship with Underhill turned into a friendship via, of all things, me asking questions and finding shit for them to look at. We'd start several DMs on a number of now defunct Tumblrs, Twitters, and Discord accounts. Our rapport would grow naturally, though my anxieties would sometimes tell me that I was being a bother. But in the end, our friendship has remained firm. In fact, we're actually going to be meeting up in person later this year. I cherish our relationship. I would end up rather liking some of the episodes Underhill recommended. One such episode was the TOS story, The Empath. The story has Kirk, Spock, and Bones get abducted by a small group of aliens to be tortured for unknown reasons. Alongside the trio is a mute woman with empathic abilities. Being the 60s, this was taken to the extreme of her being able to take on people's physical damages for them. I never even heard of this episode before or Underhill recommending it to me, and yet they spoke of it through the structure of a fanzine article that I found utterly charming. And when watching the episode, I was struck by how alien it felt compared to even other episodes of TOS. For starters, there is a minimalist quality to the episode, such that the majority of the story takes place on essentially a black box set. I quite like the dynamic of the 3 main leads, in particular Bones, whose warm heart is felt throughout the episode, all the way to the bare, optimistic end. I have a love for the theatrical and the absurd, the uncanny and the strange. So much of the Star Trek I truly love is engaged not with space battles or Klingon culture, but rather in people being confronted with things that should not exist, but do, and then spending their time trying to understand, or at the very least, live with them. By contrast, another episode I rather liked was the TNG story, We'll Always Have Paris. While founding itself in the rather basic plot time loop structure, the central hook of We'll Always Have Paris is the relationship between Captain Picard and his ex. The first time they are alone with one another in the episode is a real hoot. Both Patrick Stewart and Michelle Phillips have a warmth and chemistry with one another, even as they both know that it would never work between them. As an aside, I'd like to note that I actually wrote a comic sequel to this episode a few years back, wherein I did some structural trickery involving a 9-panel grid. I should probably either revise it into something tangible or throw it out completely.
Be interesting to see.
I love how much they act like adults when talking about what happened. They don't get into the hormonal teenage shit that science fiction, even other Star Trek series, is wont to fall into. Instead, Picard admits that he messed up and they talk about it with like a warm memory, even if it's rather dismal. They've had a long time to grow in the wake of their time apart. It's hard to keep the old grudges alive and well. Even the bad memories melt away in the rain. Which brings us, at last, to the straight story. For those of you who haven't seen the film, it comprises of a man named Alvin Straight who, upon experiencing a rather startling health complication, decides to visit his brother, who recently experienced a different health complication. However, being an old man, he does not have a license to drive a car. And wanting to travel to his brother by his own means, Alvin decides the best way to make the trek from Iowa to Wisconsin is via lawnmower. In truth, this is a less absurd thing to happen than one might think. When I was growing up, one of my brother's childhood friends would frequently drive down the street in his own lawn tractor. And yet, the film nevertheless feels like a David Lynch project. I watched the film shortly after watching a bunch of David Lynch films and TV shows I hadn't experienced at the time, most notably for our purposes, Lost Highway. Though I have since warmed to the film, I found Lost Highway to be very much a rather insecure win the crowd back project in the wake of the critical panning of Fire Walk with Me. It felt like Wild at Heart cranked up to 11 with even more masculine energy to counteract the femininity of Fire Walk with Me. Rewatching the film has revealed its merits. I bring this up because Lost Highway was the film to immediately precede The Straight Story. Contrasting the pair feels like night and day, the cocaine high of Lost Highway versus the more contemplative melancholy permeating The Straight Story. On the spot, I love this film. I love the scene with the deer, the digression with the family. I love the wistful air Richard Farnsworth brings to the real-life person. I love how you can feel Mary Sweeney's interest in comedies and romanticism. It is, in fact, one of my favorite Lynch films, and one I revisit whenever I want. Around the same time, I was thinking about people who claim Galaxy Quest to be the best Star Trek movie ever made. Even as a kid, I never liked the film. I don't remember anything about it in particular that rubbed me the wrong way, like School of Rock did with its unfunny, rather banally mean-spirited nature. It just never appealed to me. When thinking about it as a Star Trek film, I found none of the things I gravitated towards with it. Even the fictional show, Galaxy Quest, feels more in line with Flash Gordon than Star Trek. Just a bunch of vague references without a true substance. And when I was thinking about that, I began to think about what the substance of Star Trek is for me. I began with the question, what's the best Star Trek series? To which I rather easily answered, The Next Generation. People can make a case for Voyager or Deep Space Nine or, God help us, Lower Decks, but those are cases too wrapped up in nerdery to fully work as a best series. Be it the fetishization engaged with by Deep Space Nine or Lower Decks, or the cult TV aspirations of Voyager, and, if we're being completely honest, Picard. Serious arguments can't be made for the other shows because they fail to leave the shadow of TOS and TOG. So, why is TNG better than TOS? Honestly, I just vibe with TNG more. I feel like the best episodes of TNG are better than the best episodes of TOS. I like that it has a rather mad cosmos that isn't inherently hostile, but just weird. There's this one episode, Schisms, where various members of the Enterprise crew are abducted by aliens for unknown purposes. We never find out anything about the aliens' motivation with examining the bodily functions of the various crewmates. At the same time, though, there's a warmth to the episode. It opens with the crew attending a poetry recital hosted by Data. The poetry is rather dull and more invested in formalistic trickery than actually engaging with the meanings and purposes of said trickery. But you can tell everyone's there likes Data and wants to see him improve his poetry. You may now rant about that episode that you hate.
Oh, Jesus Christ. You've cut out of space for me?
No, but I'm giving you space.
Oh, God. Fucking... Yeah, so there's an episode of Next Generation called Hollow Pursuits, and I hate it. It introduces the character of Reg Barclay, a lieutenant on the Enterprise who I like in other episodes, but he's not really the problem here. The point is, he's an anxious mess. And the way that they portray this anxious mess in the first half is that he'll be an anxious mess and he's not doing a very good job, and some main character on the Enterprise will be like, "Oh goodness, Reg, you're not doing your job that well. Well, it's okay. You can try next time." And then Reginald Barclay leaves, and this main cast member, the person you're supposed to emphasize with on the show, will turn to another main cast member and go, "Christ, that guy is such an idiot. Oh, I really don't like him." Just talking behind his back. They even make up a funny fucking name for him, Broccoli. And Picard accidentally calls him this to his face. Now, the rest of the episode, I'm not really going to... There's weird stuff about how he's obsessed with the holodeck and he recreates these people in the holodeck. I don't want to focus on that part. What I want to focus on is... You mentioned this earlier in your interactions with Underhill, where your anxiety made you worry that, oh, I'm just being a bother. This episode takes that anxious fear that anxious people have and amplifies it to 11 and says, yes, you're right to fear it. They are talking behind your back. They all fucking hate you, but they won't say it to your face. And it drives me crazy. It sets off my anxiety. And most of all, it just... The crew of the Enterprise shouldn't be acting like this. They shouldn't be acting like fucking middle school bullies.
So. Thank you. I need a short break. Just to catch my breath. Again, this is...
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah,
it's a lot.
We are on page 10 of 21.
Oh, we're halfway there! Yay! We're making it. We're making it, kids. This is riveting. I'm enjoying it. So,
TOS, for all its importance to the shipping community, feels very professional for the majority of its existence. The sex is rather crude sex that exudes the worst of 60s free love impulses. It's more interested in border disputes than the relationship between characters. And, well, there's that seed of imperialism growing fruitfully. TNG likewise has that fruit within it, just as the Straight Story does with its rather white exploration of the American heartland. And yet, there's a sense of potential for there to be more out there with both TNG and the Straight Story. One of my favorite sequences within the film is when Alvin comes across a pregnant young girl, no older than 17, hitchhiking on the road. She's run away from home because she thinks her family will hate her for the pregnancy. Alvin, for his part, takes the girl's situation seriously. He doesn't dismiss her fears out of hand, but he notes that neither one of them truly knows how her family will react. Another scene has Alvin go to a bar with another man, and they converse about their time during the Second World War. The two men talk about the people they lost in the war, be it to the Germans or their own hands. Alvin himself confesses to shooting one of his fellow soldiers, a scout he mistakenly believed to be a German soldier. The film doesn't condone or condemn these actions. It treats it with a degree of empathy and understanding. We can feel the regret and shame of the moment, of a man who has to live with it for decades finally saying it out loud. A third scene briefly mentioned has a nameless woman react in horror to a dead deer she just hit. For 7 weeks, this woman has driven down the road, hitting 13 deer in the process. She's tried everything she could to not hit these deer, and her inability not to hit the deer on the road has to drive her down has brought her to a nervous breakdown. It's an extremely funny scene, though not as funny as the scene immediately after where Alvin cooks the deer meat only to be surrounded by deer who just stare at the man. Oh god, that was so funny.
Aren't they ceramic deer?
Yeah. Oh god, yeah.
It's a good scene.
Yeah. But the film doesn't belittle the poor woman in her monologue. There's no sneering look on Alvin's face as she rants about this insanity she's in. It lets her vent it all out, sympathizing with her plight. All this together, and you can begin to see why I connect to it with Star Trek and The Next Generation, in particular. It's a movie that engages with what Star Trek so often aspires to be. An exploration, not a domination, of a cosmos that is strange and ominous, and full of weird, interesting people. about approaching said universe with empathy and fascination, wanting to see everyone be better, including yourself. There's a scene in the much maligned first season of TNG where Picard quotes Hamlet's "What a piece of work is man" monologue with conviction. SF Debris reads this with as another sign of TNG's early smugness. But what he left out was Q actively challenging that conviction, with Picard responding, "I see us as one day becoming that." Sure, the rest of the episode was rather crap, but the aspiration is noteworthy and worthwhile. We can be better if we just lend a hand. I would first publicly express my thoughts on The Straight Story being the best Star Trek movie on June 2nd, 2018, wherein I would tweet, "The only good TNG movie is David Lynch's The Straight Story. That film perfectly captures the essence of TNG's ethos and universal laws, from people generally wanting to help others and making the world a better place to the inexplicable nature of the universe." I make a number of comments in a similar vein over the years, most notably on January 6th, 2019, wherein I spoke with my good friend Freezing Inferno and explained why The Straight Story was the best Star Trek movie.
Oh, God. I almost fucking had a panic when you said January 6th. Oh, that's terrifying.
The conversation went thusly. Guess who has 2 thumbs and is officially moving on from being a third-rate L Echo to a third-rate Underhill Echo and writing a big Star Trek post? Me? Because one of the chapters of the book is flagrantly doing a Vakarangi riff, complete with Dirty Pair Phantom. Oh, neat! I meant I'm working on a sequel to the Sailor Moon post, which is the Star Trek Enterprise post. I kinda guess when I asked Underhill for a Dominion War primer, they mentioned you went straight to Enterprise. Yeah. Is that what you're going in, one must imagine? One of the stretch goals that I got is going to be on space utopianism going to war. The main thread is Tom King's brilliant run on the Omega Men, which does the Dominion War better. But it's also going to talk about Garth Ennis's Dan Dare, the penultimate episode of the Dirty Pair OVA, and probably 1 or 2 more stories, probably Starship Troopers. Intriguing! A rough excerpt is coming out this month because Alf commissioned me to write about Dirty Pair. My only experience with the Dominion War is through Star Trek Insurrection and Linkar's really bad take on the movie in the context of it when he did a crossover review of it with Doug Walker, where his take was, well, the Federation is at war, so it's totally okay for them to do their evil plan because the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. So Picard and his friends are wrong, and his pals are in the wrong. The TNG movies are all flawed in some way, but I like Insurrection the best. The only good TNG films are the ones that aren't actually Star Trek films. Affair of Nolandia, Flight 005 Conspiracy, Paddington 2, The Straight Story, Bringing Out the Dead. I know nothing about the non-Dirty Pair movies you just said, except that Pierre Capaldi is in Paddington. And I am so sorry about this Roger Rabbit impression I'm doing for your voice, Frezno.
Please!
Paddington and its sequel are just delightful films about people trying to help others out of kindness. The Straight Story is pretty much evidence that the problem with early TNG is that there was no conflict is complete bullshit. Bringing Out the Dead is a somewhat deconstructive take on TNG's empathy and desire to help people that ultimately view such actions as being good, if self-destructive, but ultimately survivable. I may need to watch these then. Also, early TNG owns. The Straight Story is pretty much everything TNG was aspiring to be. People who just want to help others traveling in a strange and bizarre universe with alien judges and inexplicable deer. It's about helping other people through their troubles, be they something simple as fixing a car or complicated as the traumas of war.
Wait.
It's one of my favorite Lynch films.
Wait a minute. Are you telling me that all I had to do to get the answer was to go back into our DMs?
Yes.
That's great. That's just perfect. Also, I cannot believe I said early TNG owns. Goodness me. You silly goose pass, Frezno. No. I will say on the record that 50% of TNG Season 1 is transcendent, awe-inspiring beauty. The other 50% is exactly as shit as everyone else says it is.
Yeah. Okay, so upon reading it now, I can see that I was slightly over-exaggerating my case with the majority of the films. Bringing out the dead in particular feels like a massive stretch. But I'd like to pull at one thread that I bring up, and that's the essay I mentioned. In 2017, I was sending out a number of reviews to the magazine Panel X Panel. These articles were predominantly based on the comic series Mr. Miracle by Tom King and Mitch Gerads, one of the 4 or 5, depending on how good Walt Simonson's Orion is, New Gods comics that are actually worth engaging with. In many regards, my work for Panel X Panel acted as a foundation upon which I would grow as a critic. I would eventually adapt these articles into my first book, One Must Imagine Scot-Free Happy. I can't help but feel rather disappointed with the overall result of the book whenever I look back on it. There are arguments I make that I wouldn't do now, expansions required to fully articulate my thoughts, and just a general sense that it would have been a lot better if my editor and I talked more or while working together. But the essay from my book that I wrote, that I'm still quite proud of, is one of the appendix essays, My Own Utopia. As I say in the chat, the intent of the essay is to contrast the various works of war and utopianism within science fiction spaces. Among them were the last 5 seasons of Deep Space Nine and their engagement in the Dominion War. The others were Grant Morrison and Rian Hughes' dare, as opposed to Garth Ennis' take, Starship Troopers, the aforementioned Dirty Pair episode, Red Eyes Are the Sign of Hell, Chase After the Killing Squad, and Steven Universe. Also Walter Morrison, but that's a whole other conversation. I will use any opportunity to bring up Walter Morrison. He is my favorite historical figure. Oh my god, I am fascinated by that man. In the essay, I highlight the failings of the Dominion War era of DS9 with regards to critiquing the utopian idealism of Star Trek in contrast to the Omega Men's approach to its significantly different utopians. In the Omega Man, we find ourselves following the titular terrorist organization as they gang Green Lantern Kyle Rayner into aiding their cause of freeing the planet Vega from the imperialistic grip of the Citadel, who are visually compared to the US military by the end. It is rather sympathetic to the cause of fighting against said grip, even as it ultimately ends on a bleak defeatism.
I just wanted to add that the whole critique of utopian idealism in Star Trek is a topic that's come up in vogue again because the Section 31 movie came out, and a lot of critics like to frame that movie against the Section 31 episodes in Deep Space Nine and say that, oh, those episodes actually really did critique Section 31 and say, no,
we'll be getting to that, Frezno. We'll be getting to that.
Oh, we will. Well, okay. Well, I await that. So, please, whenever you're ready, continue.
It's perhaps worth knowing that the central thorn at the heart of engaging with the work of Tom King, that being, he's a former agent of the CIA. This is something that is frequently advertised about the writer, both by various publishers he's worked with, as well as King himself. And, as I've said a number of times, he's one of my favorite comics writers. And this is the part where I need your help, Frezno. I don't know how to approach talking about this. I'm absolutely stuck here, and this feels like an end stop, but I still have one last piece of the puzzle to talk about. And while this is, to some degree, me avoiding actually talking about the sodding Dominion War, I would like to talk about this, because I have no idea what to say here, and maybe a conversation with someone that I don't usually talk about these sort of things will sort things out.
I'm happy that.
Okay, so Tom King's a former CIA guy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the work frequently engages in a bit of defeatism. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Tom King is a CIA agent. Well, I'm thinking back to the Danger Street and how that was, because that's also Tom King, right?
Yep. Yeah, and Love Everlasting.
Oh, Love Everlasting, which I didn't really critique that well because I didn't have this experience yet. And those comics you had me do for my Halloween marathon, those reviews. I think at one point I just threw up my hands and like, I don't get this.
Yeah, I think that was for Nameless.
Yeah, that's Nameless. So, that wasn't
okay.
great.
I want you to reread Nameless because, oh god, that's a bleak book, and I'm avoiding the topic of the CIA.
Yeah, avoiding the topic of the CIA is something. I mean, I'm thinking of a seminal work of 80s television that I watched last year.
Yeah,
that has
yeah,
that
that's
bleakness. Miami Vice, which famously ends with basically a CIA guy saying, "I own your badge, I own your ass, I can do anything I want, and I'm going to win the Cold War." To which the only answer is to throw down your badges and say, "Fuck this, we're out."
Yeah, and it's worth noting that that show had G. Gordon Liddy in it.
Yeah, actual Watergate burglar G. Gordon Liddy, and he got away with it. He went to do an Iran Contra, and he got away with it in the show.
Yeah,
I don't know if he had anything to do with it in real life. I mean,
he was in this. He was involved in Watergate. There's apparently a series called White House Plumbers about him. And he's a freaky little guy.
He's a fucking weirdo. What was he doing in 2 episodes of this 80s cop show?
Yeah, apparently he had a relatively massive TV career. Yeah, so
weird.
Yeah.
But you want a work that looks at, imperialism and the American footprint. Miami Vice is one of those works.
Yeah, and we seem to be not talking about me liking a guy who was former CIA.
I mean, it happens at times. I mean, some people, you can. It's okay to like problematic people at times.
I guess, but
it's how you grapple with that and learn from it that makes a good impression and critique.
Yeah, I mean, I could probably give several works that you could yell at him a lot. The thing with talking about Tom King specifically on this regard is that a lot of the time I get the vibe that when people critique Tom King as being CIA, not every time, but there are a lot of instances where CIA goes, the worst thing the CIA ever did was put Tom King onto a Wally West book.
What the fuck? That's just fan brain bullshit.
Yeah. So much of the fan brain is literally that. There's certainly a fascinating conversation to be had with Tom King. A friend of mine is actually working on a piece on that.
Oh, yeah.
That I'll probably share when the time comes. Because, oh god, is there a lot to be talking about?
I mean, you could if you're going to talk about comics and the CIA, I mean, you could probably, I'm just spitballing here. You could do a whole thing about wasn't there like an Alan Moore comic about swimming pools full of blood and the CIA's crimes?
Oh god, what's like? Oh god. Okay, so Alan Moore was hired to do a biography book on the CIA, the history of the CIA. He does this surrealistic take on it that argues that they are incompetent buffoons who are going to fuck everything up and are making everything worse.
Yeah. And
whereas the book wanted the thesis to be the book that on the whole, the publishers of it wanted the thesis to be the CIA is an evil mastermind behind the scenes, pulling the strings and able to do horrible, unspeakable things.
Is this where you get Alan Moore's famous quote about the world being rudderless?
Yep.
Yeah, there you go. I mean,
yeah.
And I know you said there was another book in one of these slates that has to do with the CIA. I do believe.
Yeah, that would be. I brought up Fury My War Gone By is about the horrors that the CIA did during Vietnam.
Mm-hmm. So the point is there's a lot you can say using the medium of comics in regards to the imperialist tendencies of the CIA, as effective or not as they may be. And it is kind of fanboy. You go, but he did the Flash bad.
Yeah, I basically go. I get that. I get that. You can like artists who are problematic and weird and not good, but I don't know. I still have that part of my brain is, I mean, the CIA, come on, it's absolutely horrific. They have a long, ugly history. And yeah, he was an active part of that history.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just yeah. Again. So, anyways, on to the Dominion War.
Oh boy.
In truth, I was never completely sold on the matter. Not that I thought it was bad, but rather not as good as everyone was selling it to me, he thought was. I did watch In the Pale Moonlight, the episode everyone I followed who rather liked this era of Deep Space Nine would freaking go gaga over, and to its credit, it is a perfectly good drama. But I always felt that I was missing something. As such, I asked my friend Li Underhill if they had a viewing order for the era. It's notable that Underhill is extremely enthusiastic about this era of Star Trek. But they gave me a list of episodes nonetheless, and I conversed with them in a now deleted Twitter DM chat about the series. I came to the swift conclusion that they were absolutely right. It wasn't the worst thing I read for this essay. I had to read Starship Troopers after all, and oh god, Robert Heinlein, no, god, why? But it was extremely miserable going episode after episode. Even in this relatively abridged format, I was quickly growing sick of this arc, especially the Klingon aspect of it. My god, the Klingons fucking suck! Sons of Mog alone is one of the most soul-crushing experiences I've had with a work of fiction. And The Tourist was a movie so bad, it made me the kind of asshole who turns their phone on in the middle of a theater. My capsule review to Underhill usually rounded to be about 2 to 10 sentences in length. Sons of Mog was just the word ugh. The core failing is that, honestly, a lack of willingness to go all the way. The writers of the show simply had too much love for Star Trek to give it the kicking it so rightfully deserved. Now, one can certainly critique a work of art they love of dearly to great success and ambition. But the love has a frequency towards the reverential. It is a canon that will not be rejected. It can certainly poke at the Federation with an episode like In the Pale Moonlight. There, our main character, Ben Sisko, engages in war crimes involving the murder of an unsympathetic senator, several bribes, and illegal dealings, and yet ultimately finds himself able to live with it. There are two problems with this, however. Firstly, Ben Sisko is, ultimately, an accessory to the majority of the misdeeds presented here. There's a distance between the captain and these actions, all committed by third parties arranged by another figure aligned with Sisko, a spy named Garrick. Sisko isn't even aware of the full extent of what he's an accessory to until the end of the episode.
So,
as such, I feel like the show is playing things with kid gloves.
This is reminding me of, again, going back to Miami Vice, the arc where the main character gets amnesia and becomes his alter ego, his cover, the criminal. So,
yep.
And the way they play it is, oh no, he's gone totally bad, and he's crossed to the dark side. Oh, the dark night of the soul is taking over our hero. But when you look at it, every kill that happens is either in self-defense or someone else does it. The only person he actually unambiguously tries to kill without self-defense, he shot first, is his partner who has plot armor, so it's okay, he lived. So I'm getting that same vibe from it.
Yeah. This is further emphasized by the context of the rest of the show. In a proper engagement with the implications of the text, a figure like Sisko would be framed as a somewhat flawed hero coping with the implications of what he has done, descending further and further down the path of justification and horrors in the name of the Federation, or, at the very least, engaging with what he has done. Instead, the show ends with Sisko ascending to godhood after punching Space Satan in the dick. And that's even before you get into into For the Uniform, where Cisco literally drops a poison onto an enemy colony, making it uninhabitable for 50 years while gleefully declaring himself the villain. And this episode aired before In the Pale Moonlight. Hand-wringing over a small set of murders, a bribe, and some forged documents seems a bit small potatoes in comparison. The show ultimately condoning what has been done for the greater good. As a result, any leftist take on the show has to contend with the uncritical approach the show has towards its militarism, at most looking down at a few bad apples. Indeed, there's a fetishism of the militaristic element of Star Trek in this era. Certainly, this is true of all of Star Trek. Even TNG would often embrace an imperialistic mindset, with stories about Picard doing the Space Trail of Tears, or whatever the fuck Code of Honor was supposed to be. But the advent of the Dominion War as the Federation goes to war plot that would last for the entirety of the show's last 5 seasons allowed for the militarism to surge to the surface unseen since the days of Kirk acting as a swaggering dick to the Federation. This is seen throughout the entire show, most especially in the Federation. Generally speaking, the show is very clear-cut on who the goodies and the baddies are within the context of the Dominion War. This is perhaps most notable in The Siege of AR-558, which is such a flagrant Vietnam riff, it even has a guy who collects ears. There's a bit where an anti-war person, inexplicably the arch-capitalist Quark, is put into a position where his anti-war stance has to be rejected in a life-or-death situation. Crucially, the perspective of the conflict is framed from an American perspective, such that the enemy aliens might as well be the bugs from Starship Troopers. Indeed, Verhoeven's Starship Troopers feels like an apt if unintended piss take of the Dominion War arc. A bunch of gung-ho fascists going into the depths of space to kill everything that moves, who serves the Federation in the name of American interests. That's multicultural, but nevertheless white American to the bone. Sure, there's some lip service paid to the non-white experience, most notably in the Dominion War's best episode, Far Beyond the Stars, which has absolutely nothing to do with anything, and attempts to make it connect ended poorly. But it's through the lens of a predominantly white writing staff. Even the titular Dominion comes across as echoes of this American vision of the future. There's no bones to them. They simply are bad because they are bad, and bad people do bad things. And while that's absolutely valid, when doing a critique that includes a two-parter that threatens to destroy the Federation before ultimately not doing that for a lot of behind-the-scenes reasons, and indeed, if you're going to have such a snidely whiplash villainy, you have to make them interesting and fun. And to be sure, Jeffrey Combs as the chief toady of the Dominion is a lot of fun. But he's frequently written with 3 contradictory personalities and is not the leadership of the Dominion. That goes to the female changeling, a character so drab and uninteresting she's called the female changeling. She's played as a straight-laced smug woman who thinks she's the top dog of the universe who needs to be taught her place. Okay, I might be over-exaggerating things. It has been a few years since I've actually watched the show. The memory cheats. That's before you get into the Jem'Hadar, the foot soldiers of the Dominion. They are, to put it mildly, confused in terms of core concept. There are 2 high concepts at the core of their being. The first is that they're drug addicts forced to fight in this godforsaken war because they'll die if they aren't given their daily dosage. This is rather uncomfortably engaged with in several episodes, most notably the pro-slavery Hippocratic Oath. The other idea being that they're a race of religious zealots who worship the changeling as gods. While one could certainly thread the needle to make these 2 ideas sing, the show doesn't. Instead, the show opts to add another foot soldier race, the Breen, into the mix. The Breen are a race of gas-masked aliens who, up to this point, have only appeared 3 times in non-speaking roles. Their introduction frames them as incoherent to the point where no one can actually understand them, and yet it is fully understood that they have contempt for the Federation that's never explained because the scripts were running late. Even if we frame this as akin to something like Strange Adventures or Victor LaVey's Sabretooth Me, where the point is to contrast the problem with all the benefits it could absolutely want, the critique of the Federation often lands flat for the simple reason that a proper critique of the Federation would require hitting TOS. And the writers of Deep Space Nine love TOS. There is an almost religious reverence held to the likes of Kirk, Spock, and Bones. There are countless episodes calling back to old TOS stories, from returning Klingons to literally splicing characters into the backgrounds of an episode. But this love has resulted in unwillingness to go for the jugular. Because, as I have alluded to, TOS is an extremely imperialistic text. As in, there are multiple episodes where the plot can be boiled down to Captain Kirk teaches the savages about the benefits of America. By which I mean there's literally an episode where Kirk saves the day by reading the Declaration of Independence. One would think a critique of Star Trek's utopianism would centralize itself on this era of the show. Have Kirk be complicit in Section 31, or have a guest starring Leonard Nimoy break bad, or even just have a character justify a monstrous deed by saying something done in TOS. Instead, the show glamorizes TOS as a silly show that ultimately remains the best thing ever. Ultimately, this era of Trek was a rather bog-standard and kind of drab piece of military sci-fi. It's a vision of Trek that ultimately rejects any and all utopian idealism in favor of the imperialistic vision of the American Space Police. Most telling is in the episode In the Cards, wherein one character quotes a bit of first season TONG post-capitalist philosophy, while the other wins the argument by paraphrasing Margaret Thatcher's line about how the problem with communism is that you have inevitably run out of other people's money.
What the fuck? Okay, I was gonna bring up the point you said about have somebody do something from TOS and call it bad, which reminds me of a bit of Underhill, Too Short a Season from season 1.
Yep.
Where the antagonistic admiral in that episode, literally in his backstory, did a violation of the Prime Directive that is not too dissimilar to a solution Captain Kirk came up with in some episode that I'm forgetting. But hearing that rejection of first season TOS by the words of Macbeth, that Jesus Christ, what the fuck is Star Trek doing?
Yeah, the bit is they're trying to buy an old Ben Sisko's son is trying to buy an old baseball card for his dad's birthday, and he wants to get some money, and Quark's kid goes, "Why can't you buy it?" Ben Sisko's son literally quotes the TNG explanation about how we're post-capitalist, and the kid responds, "Then you can't borrow any of mine." Oh. It's literally Thatcherism responding to socialist idealism.
I'm also thinking of you don't really mention it because you haven't delved into it yet, but I'm thinking of the latter half of Enterprise, which both is, a big war arc where the people have to do the bad things because the needs of the many, and then the other half of that is a TOS reference. Same as it ever was.
Yep. Okay. Moreover, it's also a vision of Star Trek that would act as an end stop to this era of Star Trek. Sure, there were other series to air, but there was a degree of epilogue-ness to these shows, most especially Enterprise and its engagement with the messy origins of the Federation. Most tellingly is the final shot of Deep Space Nine, which acts as a direct mirror to the opening shot of The Next Generation, zooming out into a cosmos in contrast to zooming in from the cosmos to see Picard. The loop has been sealed, and it is time to move on. But even if we put all of this aside, the fact of the matter is, the last 5 seasons of Deep Space Nine largely suck. I can respect a work of art that has politics I don't fully gel with. I'm rather fond of the work of Clint Eastwood. I've liked plenty of cop shows over the years, like NCIS or Miami Vice. I have a sizable sympathy for some of the works of Zack Snyder. Some of the works. The Dark Knight is a great movie. And yeah, Frank Miller kinda slaps as an artist. But Deep Space Nine's last 5 seasons aren't that good. I often note that the best way to understand the show is that it's a rough draft of what would be done better with Battlestar Galactica, a show I need to be in the right headspace to watch. You can see the writers trying to figure out how to do a multi-season serialized television show, but they haven't yet. So they end up sucking at it. Season 3 is a confused mess that is unsure what it wants to be, as to be expected in transitionary periods. Season 4 decides to sidetrack itself with a bunch of Klingon bullshit because the studio thought boost ratings. Season 5 and 6 start to get things rolling into something coherent, respectable mid-tier television, albeit with a rather drab heterosexual romance given to Garrick solely to make the inevitable fridging all the more tragic. But then there's season 7, where the show just gets away from the writers, resulting in several really bad decisions, culminating in an overbloated, craptastic 8-part finale. A major sticking point that comes to mind is the two-parter Homefront Paradise Lost, which is basically about Sisko and the gang finding out about a false flag operation within the Federation to push a more fascist agenda. The episode ultimately stumbles with the characterization of Sisko, starting out as being gung-ho about the move to martial law, before shirking at the horror of after one conversation with his dad, the second act acting as if he was always against the martial law. There are certainly moments in the two-parter that I wish were expanded upon. I love the characterization of the changeling who approaches Sisko to go, "We aren't responsible," because he acts like such a little shit in a way you wish was carried on with the rest of the Dominion. Because my god, the Dominion are boring! No one likes the Dominion. They like Wei Yun, and they like Dukat, and some of them like Kai Wynn. But generally, the episodes were just meh, which honestly describes a lot of Deep Space Nine's last 5 years. There were some truly horrendous episodes. I will hunt down anyone who defends Prophet and Lace, and don't get me started again on Sons of Mog. But the whole is rather middling. And yet, the shape Star Trek would ultimately take was in line with the more war-oriented Deep Space Nine. This was due to the nature of the world being irreparably altered in the wake of the actions of the 80s and 90s finally coming home to roost with the destruction of two towers. Utopian daydreamers were simply not in vogue. When Star Trek returned, as all IP do in this modern age, it came back as more militaristic in its approach. The strangeness of the universe was sanded down in favor of your old favorites like Lorbo McAnderson, the Klingons, and you. The utopia and its subsequent thorniness were sanded down into mere gestures. Perhaps this is why I think The Straight Story is the best Star Trek movie ever made. Because it represents a road not taken. A road full of weirdos, dreamers, and inexplicable deer. And, it's actually a pretty damn good movie. November 17th, 2024 to January 15th, 2025.
Well, we did it.
Postscript. A river runs through the city where we live. We're not too far from the mouth, and the river itself is wide, with slow-moving and stagnant waters. It's smelly, too. The land along the riverbank has been left undeveloped. There you'll find an overgrown field of Canadian goldenrod and cat carcasses strewn about. It's Thursday, January 16th, 2025, around about 1:31 in the afternoon. I'm at home, sick. I've not vomited or had bad diarrhea, but I've nonetheless felt sick. I've been recuperating by sleeping in and relaxing, which is to say not adding an additional section to this absurdly long piece. About 3 minutes ago, my good friend Harry had informed me that David Lynch has died. As with a lot of filmmakers, I got into him through my brother Patrick. He's a massive film nerd to the point where he can get rather pretentious with his tastes in film, though, from time to time, I'll poke the bear and make jokes about his love of James Cameron's Avatar. He got into Lynch in high school and showed me a couple of his films, the first of them being Wild at Heart, around about my sophomore year. I've not watched the film in years, but I remember liking it quite a bit. In particular, I love Nicolas Cage's rendition of Elvis Presley's Love Me Tender, such that I'd rather annoyingly ask my brother to play his bootleg copy of it whenever we were driving to the movies, and the rather oddball comedy at the heart of the film. I mean, considering the film ends with Glinda from The Wizard of Oz, played naturally by Sheryl Lee, descending from the heavens to get Cage's character off his ass, It's a really funny, earnest film. I would shortly thereafter watch Blue Velvet and fail to watch Eraserhead due to the limitations of television software and the brightness level required to watch Eraserhead. I remember watching Blue Velvet, and I'll probably do so again tonight, given the news. I did, by the way. I really did enjoy rewatching it for the first time since high school. While my brother was out looking for colleges during the summer before my junior year, I decided to watch Mulholland Drive. My brother had talked about how utterly confusing and confounding the film was, citing the pamphlet that had 10 questions to ask when figuring out the film. As soon as I got to the scene where Laura Herring wore a wig that made her look almost exactly like Naomi Watts, I understood the film perfectly. I called my brother, or while he was out with my parents in, I believe, Ithaca, New York, to inform him that, if anything, the film made too much sense. In hindsight, this was an early part of my queer awakening. I wouldn't watch another Lynch film for a hot minute. I've watched a few of his shorts, but none of his full films. To be more precise, 2017, shortly after I finished college, I decided to wait to watch Twin Peaks: The Return until after I had completed, and I finally finished watching, and I finally watched Twin Peaks proper. I watched several video essays extolling the virtues of this show, most notably the amazing digital circus actor Alex Rochen's top 10 scariest Twin Peaks moments. I have a love of top 10 lists. I literally would watch top 10 lists whenever. Or that's actually how I got into Doctor Who. I saw top 10 Ninth Doctor moments and went, fuck me, I need to watch this. And Scout Tafoya's Unloved on Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me. But while skimming through Twitter, I saw a tweet by Elle Sandifer noting the similarities between episode 8 of Twin Peaks: Return and a movie called Wax: The Discovery of Television Among the Bees. Curious, I watched the film and was instantly transfixed by the imagery and implications, because holy shit, that is some wild cinema. Lark, I decided to watch the 8th episode of Twin Peaks: The Return without the context of the rest of the show.
Oh God!
Yeah. I immediately clocked that this was the most Grant Morrison thing to ever air on television and resolved to watch the show in its entirety at some point. That point would come in 2018, shortly after I watched Joel Boco's Journey Through Twin Peaks. The video series is a massive deep dive into the whole of Twin Peaks, highlighting Mark Frost's mystical aspirations, David Lynch's love of small towns, and so much more. I love the style the video presented itself with, always aware of the necessities of the audio-visual medium. There were so many moments in here that flowed almost perfectly, some even perfectly. The killer revealed still lives in the back of my mind. I resolved to actually watch the damn show, and I quite like most of Twin Peaks. We all know how bad season 2 is, and I don't have anything to add. I immediately loved Fire Walk with Me. And the return was fantastic. But more importantly was one of the Lynch films I watched prior to Twin Peaks that get me into the mindset of Lynch, The Elephant Man. Neither myself nor my brother had seen the film, so we gave it a watch. By the end of the film, we were in tears. About a year earlier, on January 6, 2017, my grandfather died. He had worked in construction as a younger man and had some damage done to his lungs due to the concrete he inhaled. The last thing I said to him was a reference to another surrealist television show, The Prisoner. Be seeing you, I said. The last thing he heard of me was a yelp of pain as I accidentally headbutted my aunt in an attempt to rest my forehead onto hers. I didn't cry then. When we left the hospital, my brother had to pull over the car and burst into tears. I didn't cry then. It wouldn't be until 3 a.m. that my mom would return home with the bad news. But still, we knew it was over. I made another television reference while trying to console my mother and my soon-to-be-awake brother. "It's over, isn't it?" I asked. We spent an hour in our company. I didn't cry then. A few days later, we would attend the for the old man. I was reading a crappy book about Madoka Magica that was a bit too fanboy about the series, and not as engaging as This Very Soil, mostly to avoid family members, just consoling people, and just being away from the body. The body felt like a mannequin, you know? I didn't cry then. When the funeral happened, I saw my grandmother cry for the first time in my life. It was uncomfortable and nerve-wracking. I didn't cry then. When we watched The Elephant Man for the first time and saw that ending. Nothing will die. The stream flows, the wind blows, the cloud fleets, heart beats. Nothing will die. All the stars in the sky, and the world felt so much colder. Be seeing you.
Well, that was beautiful.
Yep. So those were my thoughts on the straight story.
Well said.
What did you think I was going to say?
Well, I thought you were going to bring up the fact that at many points in the movie, Alvin Straight looks up at the stars. Thought that was going to be part of it. Also, the curious mirroring the fact that the story starts in Iowa, and Captain James T. Kirk is from Iowa. I thought that might play into it a little, but yeah, it has the same vibe as early TNG. You know, that's what appeals to me about TNG. The fact that you go and see weird shit and it makes you a better person.
Yeah, that's what I like about Star Trek.
Yeah, I like that too.
Yeah, and
So it's a
I
straight
did not
story
want to
about
write those last 1,000 words.
Yeah, that's poetic. Wow. I can see that ethos now that you mention it. It was worth the 14 months and broadening horizons. It was all worth it.
Yep, and again, you didn't have to do this. You just had to check the old DMs.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I found out that, I literally was writing through and went, okay, have we actually talked about, when was the first time I actually brought this up to you? And I looked it up and, I actually did explain this to you.
That's so funny to me. Oh, God almighty. Well, this has been an odyssey and a half.
Well, thanks for staying by my virtual left.
Of course. It's the place that I have so much. So, where can you find us, lovely people? You can find me on Blue Sky at Freezing Inferno. You can find me blogging at fresnosravingants.blogspot.com and on Twitch every Monday night, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, twitch.tv/Freezing Inferno. I'm currently playing through the Hideo Kojima cyberpunk adventure game Snatcher and having a lovely time. Sean, where can the people find you?
I'm bumbling around. I do reviews for The Beat, and I'm mostly found on thekingandredandblue.blogspot.com, though I'm going to be doing a site upgrade in a few months. I am currently working on an article that I have owed someone for 5 years, and I can be found on Blue Sky at Death Crisis 2000, and then also on Tumblr at that same handle. Where I usually just retweet other people's interesting things.
Well,
Thank you all for joining us, and be seeing you.